So with that, we move towards new features. So as usual, when there is a new operating system being launched, you will have a couple of new features. And the iOS developer community truly welcome them, happily welcome them. So we're going to see a couple of new features. So first of all, Apple actually added a new multitasking functionality. One feature is background fetch, which I'm going to talk about in detail. Another one is remote notifications, although they existed, but now there's a small change in it. And it's absolutely cool. The third one is background transfer service, and this is completely new. So before we look into all those features which I told you, we'll just look into how multitasking works on iOS. So there is a new thing called as app switcher. So the guys who are not iOS users, now this is what happens when you want to switch from one app to another app on an iPhone or any iOS device. You just hit the home button. So when you double tap the home button or double click the home button, it actually gets into this mode called as multitasking mode, where you can skim through all this apps, and app shows a snapshot in this case. Whereas previously this wasn't the case. You didn't have any snapshot or the current update of the app being shown, but right now it is. Now in this case, even though app shows a screenshot, even though the app is not running in the background, they're just showing you a screenshot or snapshot of the state of the app. So as soon as the app gets into the background mode, this is what happens. So you want to switch, you just hit double tap and you get this smooth scrolling view where you can skim through all the recently used apps and switch to them. Now, how good is this in iOS 7? Now let me give you an example. I'm using a message app. Let's say I'm chatting with one of my friend, and so there's a to and fro chatting happening. And let's say like I switched from my message view to my mail view, and I'm reading some mails. But then I get a message. So how do I get it? I come to know using the notification. So in the notification I get saying that, hey, this person has messaged you, or this person has texted you. Then what happens in the new multitasking is, even though I get a new notification, I really don't. So let's say I didn't have a look at the message. I'm just reading my mails. But then when I double tap on my home screen, my app's screenshot is updated with the latest message which I received. So that's really cool. Now how does this work under the hood? So we are going to see that right in a moment. So so this is how it works. First of all, you tap on an app, your app is launched. Once your app is launched, it's going to fetch some new content. For example, let's say it's our messaging app. And once that is done, it's going to update my UI. And let's say the user has hit home button. Now the app suspends, but at the same time it takes a snapshot. So it takes a snapshot of the current update and puts it to the app switcher. And there are two more things, the two more entry points in this flow, that is remote notifications and background fetch, which would be slightly talking about it in the next slide. So this is how app switcher works. So first of all, background fetch. So these are the two things, background fetch and remote notifications. So I'm showing you a screenshot of the capability. So if you want to do any kind of backgrounding, operation on iOS, first of all you need to go and enable those capabilities. Enable them under capabilities section. So we just go to capabilities and you enable background fetch and remote notification. So this is where you go and enable them. And it's available for all the apps. Now what does this mean? Now, as you can see my capabilities section, you can see a couple of names: iCloud, Game Center, Passbook, in-app purchases, Maps, Interapp Radio, and all that. Now, previously when you had to do any kind of backgrounding task done, let's say the person hits a home button and you want your app to be running in the background, but then your app should fall under any of these categories. Otherwise, Apple was never allowing any kind of backgrounding activity. So, but now, you don't have to be specific about your app. You don't have to say that my app, even though your app, for example, let's say Maps, location update was an app where they could use this feature exclusively, or VoIP, if your application had VoIP in them, they could use this feature exclusively. But what about the apps which doesn't have any of these features, which is some other kind of application? So, but now you can use them. So it's available for all the apps. It's not completely specific on each and every functionality that your app provides. And it is PowerSmart. Now what is PowerSmart? Actually, this is not being initiated by the user. It is being initiated by the iOS. So the daemons do this. So you don't have too much control over this. So iOS is actually deciding when to do this or when to fetch this. We're going to talk about that in detail. So it's not going to drain your app battery a lot of your phone. So that's with PowerSmart. So now let's get into the topic background fetch. Now how this background fetch happens. So it's like it looks for an opportunity to perform this background fetch. Now what does that mean? Let's say I'm actually using an app. It's a newsfeed app, and I just open the app. Let's say morning I just open the app and I go through the news feeds, and then finally I open the app in the evening. So what my iOS does, it actually profiles. It profiles when I'm using my app, so that it updates before I'm going to open my app. So it studies how I'm going to use my app. So this is how it performs. So let's say it's 5 p.m. Always I open my, usually at 5 p.m. I just open my app to check my news, but then before 5 p.m. my app would get updated in the background with the content. That is background. So it can be a game or a social field or anything, and it also updates the app snapshot. So the user feels that he's up to date. So even he's in the app switcher, he said, wow, I got the new or the latest feed even though I didn't open my app. So this is totally done by background fetch, and it is initiated by iOS. Now as I told you, it's based on the previous usage. So iOS is going to look at it like how the person is going to use this app when these apps are getting opened, and then tries to launch the app in the background. And it also can be at opportunist time. Now what does this mean? Now this can be, let's say, it can also do an update or a call on this app when you're in conditions like you have switched your phone to a power. You have plugged your phone to a power, or you have a very good signal strength and your battery is good. At that time also the apps can, the OS can call your specific app and go for an update. So what as developers we need to do is, as developers we should be always ready. That is what that is why I'm talking about this. As developers we should be always ready that whenever iOS calls me, I should be ready to go and fetch the data and update my UI. So let's come back to the previous flow. So in this case, what happens is, so both of these new modes which I'm going to talk about, one is remote notifications, which we'll be slightly seeing in a moment, and background fetch, have UI application delegates that go along with them in both cases. And there is a completion handler that is handed to you, and you actually need to call the completion handler. And when you're done with updating the UI, the app would suspend as usual, let's say, and take a snapshot. So this is how it works. So you are given a completion handler and make sure you use it. Rest is handled by the iOS. So updating the content. So there are certain things that we need to note while updating the content. One is call the completion handler as soon as possible. So if you're taking too much of time, you're not calling the completion handler, you may get terminated by the iOS. And also keep your fetches small. Now background fetch is not used for fetching large amount of data. Actually you have another new feature, that's what we're going to talk about that in a moment, called background file transfer, a file service or transfer service. So that is for the large amount of data. So always when you're using a background fetch, make sure you do a small fetch and use the background transfers for large data. Now another thing you should be really concerned when you're updating the content is beware of data protection. Now why am I talking about this? Now this may be an interesting case when you need to, fetch and so let's say you're going to fetch some data and you're contacting some servers, okay, and the servers in some cases would require credentials, and the person let's say the person has locked his phone, and but this background demons would be calling this app, and the whole process what we talked about would be happening. But at that point of time, if it requires the credentials, and we should note that whenever your phone is locked, data protection is enabled on your phone. That means your keychains are locked. So now you cannot access your keychains because they are locked. Now this can lead to confusions. The problem here is many people may not properly read about data protection on iOS, so they think that they're not able to contact the server, or their passwords are wrong, or there's an authentication failure, all such issues. So please give attention to the data protection, okay? And to get around this, I would recommend to read Apple's document on data protection and security frameworks. Now, how do you actually do this background fetch? You turn on the capability as I told you in Xcode, and actually you set a minimum background fetch interval code. That's a piece of code that you need to write, and I'll be showing you where you should write that. And you explicitly enable your that in your app delegate, and you implement a method, perform fetch with completion handler. That's a delegate method. And finally you call the completion handler. Okay, so let's go and have a look at how we're gonna write this in our piece of code. So as we all know, this is our delegate, application delegate, which is in our app.delegate.h file, and we actually write this piece of code so that you're telling the OS, okay fine, there's a new content, please do call me, I'm going to update it. So you need to write this piece of code, set minimum background fetch interval. Now this is the default piece of API to perform this background fetch. There's another API where you say UI application background fetch interval never. That means your background fetch will never happen. But we are just focusing on this. So then when you do that, your delegate that is perform fetch with completion handler would be called along with a completion handler, and this is where you actually write the piece of code to do any of your tasks. Let's say you want to contact your server, download the new data, and all that. Now coming to push notifications. Okay, so push notification is delivered to an app. Let's say push notifications was there all the way. Even you have used in iOS 5 or iOS 6, you would get a notification. Now there's something different here. Now how this works, so previously how it used to work, let's say like I used to get, I'm not in the app right now, I'm out of the app, my app is not running, my app is suspended or even in a terminated state, let's say, and you get a notification. Let's take the previous example that we have used for our messages. You get a notification, you get it in a notification bar, let's say, and unless you hit that notification item and then it opens your app, then it tries to download the data. So immediately the data is not downloaded. You need to open the app and then it tries to pull the data from the server. So usually your APS piece of code that you write, your payload looks like this. You'll have an alert, especially that will be an alert view, or in fact you could use a sound. You could use a sound or you could use an alert. So this is how your payload looks. Now the new thing in remote notification is that you could use content available. Now if you set this key, what happens is, so in the previous scenario we just saw that you get the notification, you just tap on it, it just opens your app, downloads the content. But in this case you get the notification straight away, your app is kicked in the background, kick-started in the background, it starts running, starts downloading the data. So if the user at later point of time, if he tries to switch to the app, he already has the updated data. So very simple thing, only one thing that you need to do in your payload, just you need to set content available 1. Now there's another request from many developers. They wanted silent notifications. But then finally now they can be happy because Apple has allowed that. Now you could send silent notifications. Now silent notifications are like you don't want the user to get disturbed. Whenever you send a notification from your server front, you want the app to get updated without disturbing the user. So how that can be done? Now you don't want alert, you don't want sound. Only thing that you need to do is you need to just set your content available key. That's all you have to do. You get a silent push and user is not notified. But one thing that you need to note here is your pushes of the silent notification should not be too frequently, as Apple says. So if you're too frequent in sending this, you may get throttled. Okay, but even though Apple says they have set the limit as high, but then you should be aware of this. Too many frequent notifications will be stored in the server and might be delivered later, but not at that point of time. So with that, we'll move on to background transfer service. So what's background transfer service? Now, this is a service to upload or download data. Now, even this wasn't allowed in the previous previous version, sorry. Let's say you have an app and you're downloading music in the app, and you try to switch to another app. And now what happens is you had an opportunity where you could ask some time, that you could ask the iOS, like, give me some point of time and later you can kill me or you can terminate me. But then if the data is too large, what happens is at any point of time you switch it, after some time anyway your app is gonna get terminated if your app doesn't fall under any of the categories which I earlier mentioned. But now using background transfer service, you can just do this. You can just download, you can switch the app. Your app may be terminated or suspended, but it makes sure the content is downloaded in the background and notified to the user. So it's a transfer done out of process. As I told you, again, the iOS is the one who is actually taking care of this. The daemons are taking care of this. So apps can be suspended or be terminated, but it keeps on downloading it. Now, it is specially used for or intended for large amounts of data. As I told you, if you have a couple of large images, you have large files to be downloaded, you can actually go for this. And it's relaunched in the background when the transfer is complete. Now, so in order to achieve this, you have a new class in iOS 7. Now that's called NSURL session. So initiate NSURL session. Now I'm going to show you like how you're going to use this NSURL sessions. So first of all, you need to create a configuration object. Now this is the one who is going to tell the daemon, okay, go and download this stuff for me. So you need to initialize your configuration object, but there are then a couple of other background session configuration objects, but I'm going to just deal with the one which we see right now, that is background session configuration. And then what you do, you actually create a session. So this is how you actually declare them, and you create a session and you initialize that with a configuration object, and you set the delegate. Now for the guys who are new to iOS, delegate is a kind of a pattern that's being followed in iOS. Okay, so this delegate object is gonna get called whenever the download is complete or you want to notify the process and all such things. So it is, in other languages I could say it's like a callback. And also I need to use here the delegate queue. I need to specify an operation queue. Then finally I need to specify the URL, because that's where I'm going to get the content from. That's where you mentioned to where should you go and fetch it. So you initialize your URL and you initialize an object called NSURL session download a task with the URL, and there you go. Once that is done, so let's say the tasks are created, paused. So let's say the person hits home button, you can always resume it later and start the downloads. Now, people use this in conjunction with the previous background fetches, like what we saw, remote notifications. Let's say you want to get notified at the same time, you want to download a large amount of data. So usually they go in conjunction with respect to an application. Now, the task support here, as we know, these are all the network calls. So what all network calls can be done here. You know, it supports suspending, it supports resuming, it supports canceling. And when complete, the app is resumed in the background. So this is the guy who's going to get called. So handle events for background URL session, and it has got a completion handler. So this is where you actually write the code for re-establishing the session and you handle the results. And so completion handler, you're going to tell that, okay, fine, I'm completed with the download. Okay, fine, I'm completed with the upload. Things like that. Now, the things that you need to consider here with respect to the delegate which I showed you, short amount of time is given to handle the results. So that there is a background timing object or a property we could see like how much time left, and you can actually do this. And be sure you call the completion handler soon. But if you don't call the completion handler soon, it's going to get terminated. And as I told you earlier, be aware of the data protection. So you may be running while the device is locked. At the same time, you want to download something from a server and it has got credentials, and things are stored in your keychain, it's locked. So you need to just read the Apple documents for data protection. So with that, we'll move on to modules. Now, what is modules? With the day first, when you write an Objective-C code, you might have used a pound import, viewcontroller.h. Say in this case, even it's a console application or even it's a single view application, you might have written this. So what does do? It is better than our include statements. Okay, it's better than our include statements. So here what happens is we usually use our system frameworks to import them. We use mapkit.h, mapkit/mapkit.h, or we even use media player, mediaplayer.h. But now we have a new thing called as @import media player. Now how this is better than hash import or pound import. Now what happens in hash import is you are actually copying and pasting that particular piece of code in your code, and it has got to do with your build times, right? It has to be linked and also indexed properly. But in this case, when you actually use @import, what's going to happen here is Apple says that it's going to create a symbol database, optimized symbol database, and it's anyway going to query all this files or methods or classes in a very fast way, rather than the previous. So rather than the previous method of using pound import. So it's actually a benefit for you because the performance is great, because if you're dealing with larger projects, you have so many classes, you're importing so many system frameworks, and the system frameworks in turn calls other system frameworks, in turn calls so many classes and methods. So it's gonna be a huge impact on your build time. So use @import, which is gonna be very fast. Your build times are very fast, as well as it helps. Using @import, your indexing is also faster. So now let's say and it's followed by a semicolon. Now if you want to import a part of the framework, you can always use the dot operator followed by semicolon. Now another advantage here is when you use pound import, you have to manually go and enable. So there is a section under build phases where you go and link libraries. But in the earlier cases, you had to do this, otherwise it will end up in a runtime error, or you will not be able to compile the project unless you include these libraries. But right now, you don't have to do this, because the modules will take care of all this. So it's automatically going to link your libraries and do the work, and it's pretty faster. So the only thing that you need to do here is, if you're not enabled, you need to just go and enable that in your build settings under enable modules. And also you just set your links frameworks automatically. So it's anyway going to link to the framework automatically. So it's an optimized symbol database, which much faster than .h. It will auto-link any necessary framework, and by default it is enabled in all export file projects. So moving to 64-bit support, as we all know, since iPhone 5s was launched, it's a 64-bit device. So Apple has moved to a 64-bit architecture. But certain things that you need to know when you actually do with the type size change. The things like integer, float, and double will remain same as 4 bytes, whereas even on a 32-bit as well as 64-bit, but whereas the data types like as long are 4 bytes in 32-bit and as well as 8 bytes in a 64-bit. And that's actually does for a pointer or NS integer, CG float, and CF index. Now this isn't a problem at all, but the problem comes when you actually try to use an inconsistent data type. That's when, let's take an example. Here I'm going to show an example where I have a method calculate random number which will return me an NS integer. So in this case it's going to return me an NS integer, but now this won't be a problem in my 32-bit architecture. But if I'm going to use my 64-bit, we all know that NS integer is going to be 8-byte and integer is going to be 4-byte long, and this going to have a serious issue. So that is one more thing. And by default, you don't have the settings to separately compile a build for 32-bit as well as 64-bit. There's only one setting in your build setting. Just go ARM64 or ARMv7 or ARM7s. There is no specific build right now, but maybe Apple may come with this in near future. So this is where you actually go and do the setting. And the other issues are like pointer arithmetic, because if you go, so this can be a problem with people consider Objective-C as another language. Let's say they want to cast pointer to int and perform some arithmetic operations. I mean, that's never going to work. I mean, it's going to be a problem. And don't directly access is a pointer, because if you want to get into the internal structure, let's say you write row codes to get the internal structure of an object, and you try to use is a pointer, but I would recommend using object get class method instead of using is a pointer, because that again leads to a point problem. Another one is if you have written any assembly language in your code, please rewrite that for the specific platforms, or else again, maybe the static analyzers may not come up with all these problems, but you might get caught somewhere else, because you never know where the problem lies. I would recommend you to read a small 25-page document which is released by Apple's 64-bit transition guide when you're writing apps for 64-bit as well as 32-bit. Okay, so that's with 64-bit transition issues. Now finally, we'll move on to